Now we're going to look at a group of moves that for me came a little bit later after having developed some of those earlier position shifting techniques that we looked at. We're going to talk about shifting with your first finger. And I do this one that really has developed later. I would say in the beginning I started with some of these moves that I started out with, like shifting with your third finger. But I've discovered that with a little practice and developing it as a move, it's become such an integral part of my playing. Most often, I will use shifting with my first finger just one fret, and I think the reason why it has to do with, each of your fingers being different because of just the position and the natural hand position and where your thumb and where you're actually touching the mandolin neck, and then each finger has relatively different strength or reach, based on the position of your hand. But what I found is that it would be hard to jump back and stay with my thumb in the same position and jump back further, but I can really strategically use my first finger to go one fret. And so let's look at a few examples. Let's say that I'm in G here. I'm going to start out by arpeggiating. That's oftentimes I will do that because it makes more sense to me. So this move, I'm doing it over and over. I'm kind of looping it, but I want you to see how with that simple move, I've gone from having my second finger on the root to now having my first finger on the root. And it makes sense because since the major 7 and the root are one fret apart, that's a good opportunity to do the shift discreetly, because if I were trying to shift with my second finger to get on where it would be if my first finger is on the root, see, my first finger's on the major 7, which means my second finger's on the root there. But if I'm going to have my first finger on the root, that means that my second finger really is going to be on A, playing in G major. See how the jump works? So it really works in kind of a discrete way to just shift with that one. And I actually end up doing the same thing often. We looked at that earlier with third finger going up from the major 7 to G there. So now, here's another move I'm going to throw at you. Something I often do, I will be in second, where my second finger is on the root here, but then to get, I told you that I don't like to go a whole step, but I'll actually pick my finger up and just go for this note. That's a move right there. Here, I'm playing in G major 7. And to add in an interesting note, this E flat note, I can just do it. There I did it chromatically as well, and it worked out resolving to G. So other examples of this might be so here I'm in G, and I went up to this position. It seems really high up the neck, but if you recognize that what I'm doing is that's the same as being here, right? Because my first finger is on G. So I did this lick, and what I'm doing is basically the same thing we looked at earlier, but now I'm up here. So I'm shifting, I'm doing playing this major 7, and I'm sliding with that first finger. Now I'll show you how I can connect this to an additional slide move. When I go, so I'm using my second finger here on that F sharp to slide down to an E, and then I can really resolve and land on that D. My first finger's on D. But see, I'll take that a step further. I'll even go We'll see, yeah. I'll even just pick up my first finger at the point where you are on the G string, and your only option to go lower would be to pick up your hand, and you know you're just going for one more note. It can, sometimes you can decide that maybe you want to move your whole hand, but I've enjoyed that move. What we're going to talk about is overall awareness of what position you're in and how that can inform your playing, because maybe you just want to start out further up the neck, and it helps to recognize what shape that comes from. So this next topic isn't really a specific shifting move, but it has to do with overall awareness of where you are on the mandolin neck. So let's suppose that we are playing in maybe the key of D. Basically, you want to play notes that are higher up the neck. You don't have to get there by shifting and sliding up. For instance, you can just be here, or you're wanting to play these notes that are higher, that are up here, but it's not really one of those notes that we talked about being like the root or maybe it's the fifth, which just the same, you could start here with your first finger on A, but again, bringing up this idea of a greater awareness of what position you're in. Because see, when I play with my first finger on the fifth, it's the same position as when my first finger is on the root as well. So the same would be true for when I'm here, I'm in this position, but I'm not explicitly playing these notes first, but I know that by having my second finger on B, that this implies that I'm in this position. And see, then I can do something different. I moved out of it. But let's say I'm playing in D. See how I jumped up here? If I know my highest note is going to be C sharp, then why did I play with my third finger as opposed to I could have just reached for it with my fourth finger? The idea there is that the position those are the strongest fingers that will sound the best when I go for these notes. But also, the truth is, I don't know if C sharp is going to be my highest note. But by setting myself up in this position, I know I could get a D, or if I wanted to even play higher notes, then I could maybe shift again. So another example would be if I'm playing in the key of D, but then let's say I'm going to go for this F sharp note. But once again, I'm not using a shift to take me there. I'm just with an awareness of where that I could, where that is on the neck, that I could play in this position with my first finger on the root. I know that I could play many things, but it doesn't have to be my first finger playing that note. It could be third finger playing F sharp. Because for me, that shape allows me, these fingers correspond to those other notes that are in that D scale. So let's say that I'm playing in the key of G. So I just randomly went for these high notes, but see, that's not that as complicated as it seems. I know it seems like I'm just like going up here really high up the neck, but if you develop the awareness that really that's an F sharp, and so let's look at it down here. It's the same thing as if I'm just playing. So I'm starting out in this, I say starting out, but I'm just creating this lick where the lick kind of starts on this note that's not really in my double stops, as we talked about earlier. But the awareness of that that position implies that these are the notes, the fingers that would correspond. Now we're going to combine some of these techniques that we've already looked at, and we're going to do a move that's a little bit more complex because it involves several shifts. So now we're going to put these different ideas together, and we're going to create some lines that are a little bit more complicated, that really shift positions, and we're going to dissect what these different shapes are that they come from. So the first thing that we're going to look at is in the key of G. And so if I were playing in the key of G, I have different moves that I'm going to use to get up the neck. First one, which I do oftentimes, I do this trick which I talked about earlier, which was playing the note past it, that type of thing. But I'm in first position, so I'm going to use my fourth finger actually. And the reason why I do that, because it makes the picking easier as opposed to going for an open A string. Okay, so what happened here was I'm arpeggiating up and then getting that 9. And then I use our very first move that we learned, which was the slide move. From third finger being on root, using my third finger to slide up to B. So G to B. And there, I can honestly, if we just look at that move alone, we can do whatever we want with it. But I included a second slide. So here, what I'm doing is I'm in this position. So I'm starting out in first position, and then I make my way to where my first finger is now on the root here. And so just by arpeggiating up again, so I'm arpeggiating up, I'm hitting that 9, and then I come back to this. I'm using that trick, which is my third finger is sliding just 1 fret. And see the difference between being here, where my third finger would be on F sharp, and being up here where my third finger is on G. What that does is allows me, with that subtle move, if you can think about in this position, look how far away my first finger is there to being up here. See, this is the new position where my first finger ends up even, see, because it's a subtle move. There's different ways to do that. But just that move right there, which is the same every time, that getting my third finger, then my hand is accommodating that, and I'm going into this new position here. And then when I'm here, I can do different things. So what if I even take that further? And I like using my third finger to shift up again, and I'm sliding from a D to an F sharp. So that is a great move to focus on, and there's different ways to do it, but the main idea is that you're shifting, shifting, shifting. So now let's say that we are up here, but I want to shift down. There's certain ways that I do it that make it feel more comfortable for me. I like doing this a lot, which we talked about earlier. We were actually in the key of D, I believe. See, here's a couple moves. I've got first finger on G. See, all of these notes, those can be whatever. But the idea is that I haven't changed positions. When I get here, those are my anchor notes. So I know that my first finger is on G there. Now, to get down, to me, I've got these couple options. The one that I did was taking my second finger and whatever I play. And so you see how I shifted down. And what I'm doing is a D to C, as if it were. And now this puts me in a new position where my second finger is on the root. And so now we can look at different things from there. But another way to get there would be, so I'm in that first finger on the root. And then I did my first finger back 1 fret to the major 7. Now when I'm there, either way you choose to get there, now the fact of the matter is that my second finger is on the root, which means that it implies this shape, right? Which would be the same as this, just G, B, G. So I've got many options, but what I like to do might be something like this, which we looked at. Or, let's see. And so even here, I chose to use my first finger to go down here. That's a lot of first finger moving back, which I'm basically doing the same thing every time. What does that look like altogether? For instance, something else that's worth discussing, we've been looking at some of these shifts that have to do with G, but if you think about a key like E minor, which would be the relative minor of G, really all of these same ideas are going to be handy. They just sound a little bit different because if these are my, my chord is E minor. Well, that works beautifully to do the same type of shift going from G to B. Because I would also, this puts me in this position now, which is instead of, the 1 being the root, my second finger is the root here. But since that's the relative major, relative minor scenario, all of those notes are the same. So another way to think about that, another example might be if I'm still in E minor. So what I'm doing is the same moves that I would do, like that we've already discussed, but now instead of being, the 1 to the 3 or the 5 to the major 7, that's the flat 7 to the 9. And so here, see, this is the move that we just looked at a minute ago, but instead of my 1 being the 3, my third finger, well, my third finger is now just on the minor third, and again, E being my root note, I can still use these same moves. You can see these examples. This example right here, I'm going back with my first finger. Another really cool example, a shift move that I want to show you guys is we're going to be in the key of D, and I want to do something that may be a little bit counterintuitive, because if you're thinking that, oh, I'm in third position up here and I want to play notes that are really, would be conveniently found normally in first position, you can actually, because I believe that it is easier to shift up the neck than it is to go back down. I don't know exactly what contributes to that. But let's say that I'm in third position. Now, a really cool move is I can be here, right? So what did I do? I've got this double stop where I've got A with my second finger in D. I mean, you don't have to be playing the double stop, but that's just a way to identify it. and I'm shifting from B to C sharp, which, see, both of those notes are not arpeggio notes in D, but it's a great move because it's part of the lick, and those are notes that I want to play at. So, and so I shifted basically where my first finger, this is kind of a starting point to think about, where my first finger is on D, but then by doing this, by shifting like that, I'm putting myself in a position where my first finger is going to be on D here. There it is. What did I do here? I'm shifting one fret like we talked about earlier, which is my first finger. Here's another one, first fret. There, I did a move. Maybe I won't always do that, but it's kind of the opposite of... It works. Now let's look at a topic that involves position shifting, but not when you're going from one chord to a new position in the same chord. We're actually going to start out in, for instance, D and go to a chord like G minor and see what techniques we can use to shift positions at the same time while we're going to a new chord. So you're going from a 1 to a G minor, to a 4 minor. So before we were talking about like doing multiple shifting in the same key and just really focusing on like, okay, where are these different places that you'd be still identifying with really the same key the whole time. But if you really take this method to the next level and you are able to identify what these different shapes are in different keys as well, basically, if you think about being in the key of D, then going to G minor, and you could think about G minor or B flat being the relative major of G minor. But either way, what ends up happening is that as it's related to the key of D, you do have certain moves that are going to work when you're in D, but then you go to G minor. So what do I mean by that? If I'm playing in D here, so my third finger's on D, which is like this position. So what am I doing here? That it really, it's a really slick move. I've identified that from an A to a B flat, you have a half step. So if I'm here, so what I did was like I'm moving from D, and I'm using a shift move, which what we might normally think of as if you're in the key of B flat. I would play something like that where I go with my third finger from an A to a B flat. But in this instance, I'm in D and I'm going to G minor. So there's a couple options there. So I'm shifting. Actually, so I've got many options. So what we can do, let's say I'm in D here. So I'm shifting with my third finger to get this B. And then from there B flat. And so from B flat, I can do lots of things. And I'm really just using the same things that like what we talked about in the key of D or the key of G, but now it's just B flat. And so let's say that I'm here. You can see how if I were in the key of B flat, the trick that I'm showing is that using my first finger to go back and forth to access that major 7. But see, now for me, if I'm in, you know, this D going to G minor, I mean, this is my G minor stuff. But by shifting that 1 fret, that puts me potentially back in D. Okay, guys, that's all I have for today about position shifting on the mandolin. Thank you for joining me, and please check out my other videos. Cheers.